Farah and her friends found themselves in a surprisingly pleasant tea stall. The front was devoted to rather cluttered shelves featuring glass jars filled with dried leaves, half-washed cups, and a stray, still-full tray, and a small table which they quickly seated themselves at. The space was bright and cozy, though it yielded dark corners that made Farah shiver a little. "Did you see that?" Essie asked, pointing to a dark corner. It couldn't be, could it?" The woman's voice echoed back toward them. "Oh, don't mind the lizards, my lovelies. They're friendly." The trio could see laughter shaking the woman's slender shoulders as she stirred this pot and that. "We only presume that monsters lurk in the shadows. Sometimes, though, we discover friends in what we assume will be foes." Beyond a swaying curtain, Farah could see an elegantly carpeted hallway that led to other rooms. A lot more rooms, in fact, than the small doorway and moderately sized entry had led her to believe. Then again, nothing about this day was what she'd expected when she first woke. Considering that they had teleported by some means into the Gauntlet, the bizarre and fantastical wares the peddlers had been hawking as they walked by, and even the appearance of this mysterious woman herself, murmuring under her breath as she set an ancient kettle over a wood stove, should hardly have surprised her. None of it was remotely normal. "Now," the woman huffed as she bore a silver tray toward them, "I'm sure you have plenty of questions, and I have many answers. Still, I think introductions and tea are a fine place to start, don't you?" "We're looking for my brother," Farah started. "Have you seen him?" "First things first," the woman said, and set a small gold-rimmed glass before each of them. Essie leaned forward and sniffed the steam emitting from hers cautiously, while Alex exclaimed, "Hey, it's mint tea, the kind Salma from 3rd grade's mom used to make for us. Remember, Farah?" He eagerly took a sip and exaggeratedly squeezed his eyes shut. "Ah, so good." Farah raised an eyebrow at him. It was the most enthusiastic he'd been so far, which surprised her. Alex wasn't the best with strangers, particularly an unusual woman who hadn't paused long enough for them to properly examine her. But then again, if there was anyone who was as reasonable as Farah, it was Alex. So she lifted her glass and eyed her tea. It wasn't the herbal, amber golden mint tea she remembered her Moroccan friend's mother presenting them with. Instead, it was creamy, with a faint scent of milk. "Chai," Farah said aloud, right at the same time as Essie finally took a sip of hers, her eyebrows shooting up to bury themselves under her bangs. "This is the ginger tea Mom makes when I have the flu. How did you know?" "The teapot knows what the guest needs," the woman said over her shoulder. "It is a friend, and so am I. Try the cookies there, too. I make them fresh every morning. There are dates in them." While Alex and Essie bit in eagerly, Farah chose to sip her chai, closing her eyes against a wash of deep, bitter heartache. The chai tasted exactly the way her mother brewed it, not with a pinch of masala, the way her father made it, or watery and a bit scorched, the way Aunt Zora preferred. That morning, as she tugged on her new salwar kameez and pulled back her hair into a ponytail so that her hijab would settle into place, her mother had drawn out the familiar petite pot and tin of tea, and for once had brought up a cup of Farah's own to sip while she got ready, instead of insisting that she'd take only a few sips and no more. "I shouldn't get you into the habit so soon," she'd said as she straightened Farah's pins and set a cup in front of her on the dresser. "You remember those jokes your aunties made about drinking chai after you get married, so if you have yellow-stained teeth, it's not such a big deal. Just 1 cup for a big day shouldn't hurt, right?" Farah had laughed with her mother, savoring that cup of tea, feeling the warm sweetness of it down to her tingling toes. This cup brought back echoes of laughter, completeness, the knowledge that Baba was safely at work, and Ahmad was lurking somewhere underneath her desk, eavesdropping until the perfect moment to pop up, Jack-in-the-Box style. Now if he darted right up in front of her and startled her so badly she spilled her tea, she wouldn't scream, she wouldn't shout or scold. She'd grab him up against her chest and squeeze him until he whined for her to let him go, and she wouldn't. "Now that your stomachs are fuller, let's get down to business," the woman said. The kids startled as the woman scraped over a small stool and settled heavily on it, mopping her brow. To Farah's surprise, she realized the woman had slid back the overshadowing dupatta, revealing an ordinary, plump-cheeked face, if a rather red and steam-scorched one. "I'll go first," the woman said cheerfully. "My name is Madame Nasira, and I am the gamekeeper." At that, Alex straightened up, his focus on the tea forgotten. He and Farah exchanged glances that assured them that they were thinking the exact same thing. Now we're getting somewhere. So, Farah asked cautiously, you're behind this? The thought made the woman seem not so sweet and friendly. It lures children, Aunt Zora's voice whispered in her ear. I was ejected from it for refusing to complete the challenges. Farah's stomach churned and she shoved away her empty cup. Perhaps this was one of the game's carefully laid lures, soothing them with familiar tastes, delightfully crumbly date cake cookies, and the single person among them, among the rushing, busy bodies outside the stall who would help them. She could acknowledge the players, but pretend they were never there if something went wrong. She'd be the only one who knew that they'd sat here, the three of them, and had a conversation with her. No one else would. But Madame Nasira was already shaking her head. No, oh no, not at all. I'm afraid I don't have that much authority here. That is the architect's responsibility. I am here to serve as an ally and guide for the children who have newly arrived on the pier. I give your team what you need to play the game. I wish you luck and supervise from a distance, and you go ahead and have a good time. Her voice rose at the end in a high, forced pitch that rang false in Farah's ears. Even Madame Nasira didn't look convinced of what she said. Remembering her aunt's pale face, her insistence that she would never give such a game to her family, Farah was pretty sure that a good time was not in the cards for them. They didn't have a choice, though. There were more important things at stake, and that reminded her. Oh, well, this is quite exciting, Madame Nasira was gushing on, the voluminous folds of her dupatta sliding back and forth as she poured a glass of tea for herself. It's been ages, you know. I've never gone so long without having a team to brief. Wait a minute, though. You help the children, right? The players? Have you seen my brother Ahmad? Farah fumbled for a moment. On news bulletins and missing posters, the police stressed being able to describe what the child was last seen wearing. What had Ahmad worn that day? She hadn't a clue. All that came to mind were the small things that made up Ahmad. His messy mop of hair, his loud voice, the way he hopped instead of stepped when he was particularly excited. He should look like me, she decided, only he's a boy, and he's younger. Younger? The architect only allows 12-year-olds to play. Madame Nasira looked thoughtful, her eyes widening. She nodded eagerly. Oh, yes, I think I did see the boy. He passed by on the pier over an hour ago. It surprised me, since there's always a great deal of fanfare once a team enters the game. Everyone has been sitting around gets to shake off the dust and watch the gears turn. It's quite wonderful to see, particularly since we haven't had anyone new through here in such a long time. He was too little, so we assumed he wasn't a player, that he was one of the street kids and the gear turning was a mistake. An hour ago, Essie blurted out, finally resurfacing from her sugar-glazed haze, crumbs dotting the corner of her mouth. I'm afraid I couldn't help him, Madame Nasira said. I'm only allowed to help the children who follow the rules, who are here with a team and ready to play. But he doesn't know the rules. He didn't mean to play at all. I'm sorry, I really am, but that's not how it works. He wandered out of the souk and right through the Paheli city gates. A jolt of horror ran through Farah. So he wasn't even here in the souk anymore? You mean there's more to the game than the souk? He went somewhere else? Farah said. How big is this place? Alex said, sounding impressed in spite of his alarm. Oh, it's quite big. Madame Nasira traced a long, curving line through a small patch of spilled sugar on the tabletop. The city gates are where the game really begins. Really. Ahmad shouldn't have wandered there. Now he'll never be able to find his way out. Essie gasped, and Adam slumped in defeat. Farah kept her eyes on Madame Nasira's. It was official. Farah didn't trust her. Or the game. What kind of game kept someone, an adult, someone who was grown and knew better, from helping a small child, particularly one who was lost and alone and had no one else who could acknowledge him or keep him from wandering off? He'll never be able to find his way out. He'll never be able to find his way out? Farah repeated, and watched Madame Nasira's dark eyes shift. Alone. You're a clever one, dear. Yes, that is the gist of it. A team has every right to go where the Gauntlet bids. A team would definitely be able to retrieve him if they used their time wisely between their challenges. Which meant that even if Farah wanted to go back out, which she did not and could not, she and Essie and Alex were the only ones who could rescue her younger brother. What happens if a team loses a challenge? Alex ventured. Madame Desire cleared her throat and busied herself with a teapot. When she spoke, she wouldn't meet their eyes. You stay in the city of Paheli forever. What do you mean? Farah asked, her heart thumping hard inside her chest. Exactly what I said. You lose a challenge, you stay here. That's how Paheli's people ended up here. Played the game and lost. Most of us, anyways. A shiver tickled Farah's spine, despite the warmth from the tea and the swirling sands outside. Alex was looking down into his cup. Farah saw the way his hands shook around it, and Essie's mouth hung open with fear. They couldn't give in to it. They had to pull themselves together and face the challenge ahead of them. They had to save Ahmad. Farah straightened herself up to her full height. Tell us what we need to know. Tell us how we can win. Madame Desire's eyes glistened. Oh, I thought you'd never ask. Chapter 7. Madame Desire cleared away the empty glasses and the decimated plate of cookies. Of course, the object of the game is to dismantle the city of Paheli. You do this by winning challenges the architect has set up inside. But what happens to the people of Paheli? Farah interrupted. We get to leave. Her voice lifted with hope. They'd get to leave. Everyone, Ahmad included. Maybe even the friend Aunt Zora had left behind, if only they could be found again. Let's go, Farah said, putting down her cup, ready to play. Madame Desire motioned for her to sit. There's more you need to know. Madame Desire let her eyes rest on each one of the kids until they nodded and showed they understood each word. Your time to get to a challenge will begin once the Paheli minaret booms, and your time to complete the challenge will begin once it flares again. She stood up and went to a series of steamer trunks lined up against the wall. The kids leaned forward and watched as she dug through them, then carefully spread out a handful of what appeared to be clockwork odds and ends, antique tools, and a stray gear or two. You can see the minaret from every single point in the city. Use it as your guiding light. Once you start a challenge, you'll have two best friends in the Gauntlet. The first is this timepiece. The kids looked at each other, and Madame Desire tapped what appeared to be a hybrid of an old-fashioned hourglass and a spare clock part. You can keep track of the time as you travel and play with this. Smart players are never surprised by the minaret's boom and sparks. They're ready for them because they watch this timepiece. You have an hour to get to each challenge site within the city, and an hour to complete each challenge, she said. This will help you keep track of it. What if it turns over? Alex lifted it and examined it carefully. Madame Desire turned the hourglass upside down to reveal a key. It will wind on its own once you enter the city and float alongside your team. Like, literally? Alex said. Like a cloud at your side, Madame Desire replied. Alex nodded slowly. Farah knew he was writing the words down inside his brain so he could retrieve them later. Now, this map is the second. This map is special. It never gives you the same image twice. But doesn't that make it useless? Essie said. Not once you're inside Paheli. It is a city of ever-changing borders and shifting streets. It will show you everything you need to see. Your challenge site, your team members, Paheli city locations, and your progress. Essie nodded as she unfurled the map over her lap, nearly toppling over onto her back with a yelp. Farah and Alex scurried to her side. Before they could ask if she was okay, they saw it for themselves. The map wasn't simply unscrolling itself. It was towering upward and branching outward. It was unfolding in elegant, sprawling, eloquently cut towers and palaces and dunes that glistened and glimmered in a way that seemed beyond mere paper, more like three-dimensional. There were the extended lantern-lit pathways of a souk, a trickle of fluttering, faceless bodies that ran dry at the mouth of a large iron gate. Beyond that was a towering, luminous blackness. Paheli, Madame Desire said knowingly, that will unfold for you when the time comes. As he growled in frustration, Farah's eyes were focused on something else, the pop-up characters that were currently dancing and sliding back and forth within the close confines of the small tea shop, characters that had familiar faces and names floating above their heads in a delicate script. Farah, Alex, Essie. And there was another one that bobbled around the mysterious mass of Paheli, a moth seeking out a guiding lamp. It had a tousled mop of what appeared to be yarn hair and fidgety limbs that flailed every which way, as though it was in the midst of a loud, aggravating tantrum. Ahmad. A lump rose in Farah's throat. He's here. He's actually there. Essie pressed her hand on Farah's shoulder excitedly. And he's right where we're supposed to be headed. Look, there's us. It shows our names. We're game pieces. Well, you sort of are, Madame Nasira interrupted, reaching between two of them to nudge the map's corner so that it hastily wound itself back up. We need to finish your preparation so you can catch him. How does the map show our progress? Alice asked. If you win a challenge, that site will return to sand and will no longer exist on the map. The borders of Paheli will shift to fill in the missing area, and the city will shrink. How big is the city? Essie asked. It depends on the hour of the day. Most of the time there are 8, but I've heard it's expanded up to 100 before, Madame Nasira said before presenting them both with 3 sets of goggles. You'll need night vision in some of the city's deepest corners and crannies, and a tool belt. Essie took control of the tool belt, hooking each set of goggles in place, and Alex held the hourglass. Farah rolled up the animated map. Monkey tokens, Madame Nasira said, handing Essie some of the gold coins to be put in one of the tool belt's pouches, so you can get some shopping done if you must. Oh, and finally I'll offer you friendly advice. You should listen carefully. Farah paused, rolling up the scroll, and Essie leaned forward eagerly. Number 1. Watch out for the grease monkeys, camel spiders, and most of all, the sand police. They are not your friends. They should not be taken lightly. What are the... Essie began. Madame Nasira was already holding up a second finger. Number 2. Always mind the map. It would be a pity to lose, and it will always have everything you need. Number 3. The game tests teams with 3 challenges. However, there's always a 4th if a team is successful. It's a protective measure, so the game players can't easily win. Be ready to be surprised. Madame Nasira leaned in closer, her voice pitched lower. Number 4. The game cheats. It will start to reassemble itself slowly as you win challenges. Alex swallowed audibly. Every bone in Farah's small body vibrated with the intensity of these instructions. The game felt real. It hadn't at first, not even when Ahmad had vanished, not even when her aunt turned away from her with tears dripping down her sad, saggy face and rushed away from her rather than face up to the long-forgotten trauma and haunted past. Now they had to take the gauntlet seriously. They had to win this. Farah knew they could. And lastly, number 5, choose a team talisman for luck. Madame Nasira presented 3 items, a golden key, a silver die, and a set of intertwining rings that reminded Farah of the ones Ansara wore. What is a talisman? Essie asked. An object that brings good fortune to the person who carries it, Madame Nasira said. Farah glanced at her friends, and, as always, they seemed to know what she was thinking. They pointed at the rings. Madame Nasira handed them to Farah, and she slipped them into her pocket. The half-closed door to the stall abruptly slammed open. The kids jumped, and Alex let out a shriek. Madame Nasira hurried to close it, drawing back a curtain from one of the windows. Whatever she saw made her eyebrows rise, and she gave a low whistle. The souk is closing its doors. You'll have to spend the night here with me, I'm afraid, and start tomorrow. Don't worry, she added when Farah gave an exclamation of dismay. Once you leave my shop and walk through the city gates, your time will be counted. But for now, you have a reprieve. Give me a hand with closing and locking the doors. There'll be no more business done by anybody today. But what about our parents? Essie said. They're going to be looking for us. I suppose you're right. Most parents likely look for me too. My parents likely looked for me too. Madame Nasira looked up wistfully. At least for a time. There's nothing we can do, Farah said, thinking of her parents and worrying about her brother. Shoulders slumped and heads bent over the dining room table, and tears streaming down Ma's face. Her heart squeezed. Farah stared out the glass windows, at the merchants bolting shutters and hurrying to cast tarps over open tables. The sky had soured into an unpleasant, cloudless gray, and there was a low, intense whistle of wind that could be heard even through the stall's wooden framework. She felt a second storm raging inside her chest. The architect must be excited to now have a new team to play against, Madame Nasira said, rubbing her arm as she waited for the kettle to refill from a small tap set in the wall. 2 sandstorms a day in the last 2 weeks alone. Something even I've never seen before. At this rate, the souk will be nothing more than a dune and locked doors soon enough. Essie and Alex accepted more tea, and soon dropped into an exhausted slumber, nestling into a heap of old blankets and shawls Madame Nasira had spread over the floor, while pointing out there were plenty of free furnished rooms in the back to be had. Farah refused. The darkness and the high wail of the rising wind behind the shut door only reminded her of how far she was from home, from her parents. Had her mother called the police? Would Aunt Zora tell them about the game? Where exactly was Ahmad, as the sand flung itself against the window panes and howled, an angry child waiting to be let in? Was he safe? Had he found a cozy corner to nestle into, as the rest of the world cowered and waited for the Gauntlet to return to its proper humor? If this world was frightening to her, how must he be feeling right now? Heartsick, Farah struggled to get comfortable. At home right now she'd be snuggled up in her bed, maybe with her brother nestled near, telling him stories of the jinn, ever his favorite. He especially delighted in the one she swore was true, from a time when she was not much bigger than he was now, a visit to Bangladesh in her grandparents' old house. Farah and her cousins gathered in the sticky, near-silent hour after the last evening prayer and decided to play hide-and-seek. Farah nestled in the dark corner near her youngest uncle's bedroom, keeping an eye on the large stone slab stairs so she could see a cousin crawling up them before they managed to see her. The shadows curled close, reminding her of the street carts that slipped into the courtyard in search of an easy meal. The street cats, that slipped into the courtyard in search of an easy meal, and the loud, happy voices of her mother and aunts preparing dinner in the kitchen downstairs seemed muted, as though the shadows were weighing on them. She shifted, uneasy, imagining she heard a step on the stairs. The idea of not being alone, even if it meant losing a game, was as welcome as a flicker of candlelight would be, especially when the electricity gave out. It was a common, everyday thing. A sigh, a roll of eyes, a pause in between the wires exhaling and shifting and popping, and the old generator wheezing itself into shape and making things bright again. The sudden rush of darkness pressed down on Farah's mouth, an open palm. Then fingers curled around her outstretched ankle. She unfolded with a shout and a panicked flail. None of Farah's cousins claimed responsibility, though they were present and snickering in the light of the dim-lit generator-powered hallway as she mopped her running nose and pretended she hadn't been teared up. She awoke now to hot, wet tears on her face. She hoped for her bed, a birthday cake bellyache, the familiar wheeze of Ahmad's snores as a lullaby. Instead, around her was a cloak of darkness, except for the occasional flicker of the candles Madame Nasira had left burning. Sand and wind whipped and howled outside the tea stall's boarded doors. It wasn't a nightmare. This was real. Her brother was lost. When the sun arose, it would be time to take on the gauntlet and find him.